October 16, 1983. Game 5 of the World Series in Philadelphia. With 2 outs in the bottom of the ninth, Phillies center fielder Gary Maddox hits a liner to Cal Ripken Jr. at short. The Orioles complete the backdoor sweep and are now World Series champions. Many baseball fans at the time thought this win marked the beginning of a dynasty in Baltimore. After all, that same year, Cal Ripken Jr. won the AL MVP and Eddie Murray was the runner-up. But the next year, the reigning champs finished 5th in the AL East. And then in the next, they finished 4th. And then the following 2 years, they fell below 500. But as much as this decline grew and grew, and the O's fell short of everyone's expectations, I'm sure nobody could have predicted that in 1988, the Baltimore Orioles would have the worst start to a season in all of baseball history. Let's take a look at how it happened. So first off, it's important to mention that this team wasn't totally awful. They had a few guys who weren't just key players for the Orioles, but premier players across the league. They had 2 future Hall of Famers in Cal Ripken Jr. and Eddie Murray, veteran outfielder and former MVP Fred Lynn, and Mike Boddicker, who just 4 seasons prior was an All-Star and 20-game winner. Something else interesting about this team is that, at least at the start, it was a bit of a family business. The manager was Cal Ripken Sr., and the second baseman was Billy Ripken. This was something lovable about the team, but it also became a point of contention once ownership grew frustrated with the Orioles' slow start and decided a change was needed. But for now, we'll examine the O's infamous start series by series. The Orioles opened the 1988 season at home hosting the Brewers. It was an ugly start. The O's lost 12-0, but Milwaukee was a good team. The year before, they finished with 91 wins, so it wasn't like this was an upset. They lost the second game as well with a final score of 3-1, and that was it. It was just a 2-game series. But of course, nobody was concerned yet. 0-2 starts happen every year. However, the next series was when people, and ownership, first started noticing something strange going on with the club. They went out to Cleveland and began a 4-game series. To put it simply, this was an awful Indians team. But the Orioles dropped the first game 3-0, and then they lost the second 12-1. Mike Boddicker, supposedly their best pitcher, gave up 5 runs and didn't even make it to the 3rd inning. They lost the next game 6-3, and then the series wrapped up with another loss, this time 7-2. One of the worst teams in baseball demolished the Orioles, outscoring them 28-6. To this point, Cal Ripken Jr. was batting .091, Eddie Murray 130, and Fred Lynn 136. And the entire team combined for 1 home run through these first 6 games. It was still early, but team owner Edward Bennett Williams clearly had seen enough. Cal Ripken Sr. was fired on April 12th, and the Orioles organization set a record at the time for earliest managerial firing in MLB history. And this obviously upset and disturbed the Ripken brothers to see how disposable the club viewed their father. Billy Ripken actually switched his number to 7 to honor his father, and Cal went into a, quote, prideful professional silence. But above all, what this showed was that ownership knew that this team was a ticking time bomb. An 0-6 start is bad, sure, but it doesn't warrant firing a manager this early. Regardless, they did fire Cal Sr., and he was replaced by Orioles Hall of Famer Frank Robinson, who happened to be the first black manager in MLB history when he was hired by the Indians in 1974. But this change didn't seem to do much. The Orioles returned to Baltimore to host the Royals and lost 6-1. And then they lost the next game 9-3, but at least Eddie Murray hit his first home run of the season. The third game, though, was one of the closest they had had to this point. Mike Boddicker took a 3-3 tie into the ninth, but they lost 4-3 after a run scored following an error by Jeff Stone in left field. Errors were becoming routine for the O's, but it's hard to say that that was the sole problem. When a team is struggling, you can try and see if it's an offensive problem, a defensive problem, or a pitching problem, but the truth is this team was doing awful at all 3. They then faced the Indians again, but this time at home. They lost 3-2, and this marked their 10th straight loss of the season. And once they lost the next game 1-0, this losing streak started developing from a Baltimore concern to a possible all-time record, which attracted national attention. In fact, Bob Rivers, a local radio personality in the Baltimore area, vowed to stay on the air until the Orioles won a game. He'd be on for a while. They lost the last game of the series against Cleveland 4-1, and they were now 1 loss away from tying the record for most consecutive losses to start a season set by the Tigers in 1920 and the Washington Senators in 1904. They flew out to Milwaukee to begin a 3-game series and dropped Game 1 with a final score of 9-5. They had tied the record with no wins and 13 losses, and entered the next game desperate to not set a new one.
Well, the Baltimore Orioles have a very special place in the history books this morning. They lost their 14th straight baseball game in a row last night, giving them the dubious distinction of having the worst starting season in Major League history.
And then after that record-setting loss, the Brewers beat them again 7-1. Eddie Murray and Cal Ripken were both still batting under 200, and the pitching staff was still doing awful. Most of these games weren't low-scoring pitchers' duels at all. The Baltimore pitching staff continued to give up a significant amount of runs per game, and the sloppy defense definitely didn't help this. They went out to Kansas City and faced a Royals team that had won the World Series just 3 seasons before. Led by Hall of Famer George Brett and sports legend Bo Jackson, the Royals pummeled the O's 13-1. They put up a good fight in games 2 and 3, but lost 4-3 and 3-1. Their record was now 0-18, which put them dangerously close to the modern-era consecutive losing streak held by the 1961 Phillies at 23 straight losses. This would be tough to avoid, as the next series they had ahead of them was against the reigning World Series champions Minnesota Twins. They started the series with a 4-2 loss, but they put up a good fight in Game 2, going back and forth the whole time. But the game ended 7-6 Minnesota, and it was their 20th straight loss of the season. Then the following game they lost again 4-2. But now the big three, Cal Ripken Jr., Eddie Murray, and Fred Lynn, all of them finally had batting averages above 200. They went out to Chicago to take on the White Sox, who finished below 500 the year before. With the bats heating up and now able to face some easier competition, maybe Game 22 would be different.
But the big baseball story, the Baltimore Orioles finally did it. Last night in Chicago, they beat the White Sox 9-0 to end the losing streak at 21.
They'd finally done it. 1 win and 21 losses. Bob Rivers could finally sign off after his 258-hour marathon on the air. They immediately lost the next game, and the game after that, but that's not that important. On the season, though, the Orioles finished 54-107. It was their worst record in a while, and clearly a very tough season for O's fans to live through. It's pretty amazing when you look at it. I mean, 0-21 just doesn't seem reasonable. For a team to do that bad, it really does have to be a perfect storm of a cold offense, sloppy defense, and a pitching staff that is just generally lost. But the Orioles had that perfect storm in 1988, and I'm sure their record will stand for a long time. At the very least, they gave us something interesting to look into. Let's just hope it never happens again.